Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
If there's any one issue that brings most, let's say, little o Orthodox-minded Christians together, crosses that great Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox divide, it's the absolute state of Christianity, at least in the United States and almost certainly including Western Europe. The state of the church, to use the most inclusive way to describe it, something I normally don't do, but the state of the broader church is dreadful, to say the least. A lack of belief reigns. A universal belief is held, or near universal, which is that we must adapt what the church has always taught on moral issues to fit the times, to speak to a new generation, as if Catholicism or Christianity more broadly, as if Jesus Christ himself were Pepsi and needed a voice of the new generation kind of marketing approach to speak to people today. When in reality, the most effective marketing the church has ever had is just witness, the gospel message, spreading the gospel, living it, and if need be, surrendering your life for the gospel. Has always been the most effective message for evangelizing, bringing souls to Christ. And again, theological differences aside, that has always been our most effective approach. What has been the least effective approach has actually been an attempt to surrender on the big moral issues of the day. And there is no greater issue of the day when it comes to morality, it seems, than all things related to the what I usually call around here the James Martin sin. The sin most associated with that famous Jesuit priest, Father James Martin, S.J., a priest who thinks that the Bible and Christianity broadly got it wrong, but especially the Catholic Church got the issue of the sins of the flesh wrong for its entire history, that even St. Paul was wrong. And he believes that Christianity should update its teachings on such things. He does ministry of that kind to work with the group in question, the chosen ones you're not allowed to critique on anywhere online without getting into very serious trouble. And that belief is very pervasive. In fact, it's so pervasive that even Catholics have to be careful where you'll go to Mass on Sunday. Protestants, I see online all the time saying that when they move, they have to do some pretty serious research to find a pastor who preaches things that are actually identifiably Christian on that topic and on a whole host of others. It's a delicate subject because, of course, it tugs at the heartstrings. People have this belief that they are entitled to love as they understand love. And it comes down to a grotesque misunderstanding of what love actually is. But we live in a time period where everyone is entitled to things, or so they think. The truth of the matter is, you are entitled to the gospel. You are entitled to hear the gospel. You are entitled to have the teachings of the church taught to you in an unfiltered, unaltered way. You are entitled to the sacraments. And that's about it. You are entitled to the salvation Jesus Christ offers through his church. And that's about it. One of the very few things in life you're truly entitled to. But people think they have an entitlement to their feelings being guarded, being protected, being coddled at the expense of the truth. And the effect this has had on salvation itself is staggering. And so we have this report that was shared by a man named Ryan Burge, a former Baptist minister. And it's a piece of information he has that if you go down to it, if you actually go down to where he shared this from, it's from a general religion research firm. And I'll put links to all this in my show notes at returntotradition.org so you can read it for yourself. He posted this with this, mostly quote, "Older Catholic priests are way more willing to conduct a wedding for a James Martin type couple than younger ones. Among those born before 1950, these would be those who are retired, basically, 61% would do so. It was 19% among those born in 1970 or later." And he shows it with a screen cap from religion data, right? And it says, "Would you perform the wedding of in question if your religious group allowed it based on religious tradition of clergy? Pre-1950, there's your age breakdown. 1950 to 1969, 49% said absolutely yes. 9 said probably not. 12 said not sure. 13% said probably yes. And 17% said definitely yes. And then 1970, on and on. But you notice here, 31 and 30 is 61%. And then another 7 is not sure. How do you get not sure on something that Scripture makes very unequivocal, to the point where the heretics who deny this teaching of the church have to actually change what they actually have to challenge the inerrancy of Scripture on it? How do you get not sure out of that? Now, for Catholics, we understand that the priests who were ordained in the late 50s, really, but especially in the 60s and going into the 70s, a lot of them were among the worst. To the point where we joke that if we are traveling and we go to a parish for confession and we see that the priest is clearly retired, but assisting with helping with occasional masses or hearing confessions, that oftentimes a lot of Catholics will pray that they're about to get an actual confession that's valid. They will go in and confess a sixth and ninth commandment sin is the usual one, and they will go in and confess their private sin, as Pope Pius XII called it, to be nice about it. We have potentially young ears hearing this. Something 90% of Catholic men and about 85% of Catholic women apparently confess to, by the way, for those who might feel a little self-righteous about how wonderful you are for not doing that. Confessors give some really dark data on that. But then they go into the confessional, and that priest will say, well, that's not really a sin anymore. The church doesn't teach it's a sin because it's so widespread. So next time you're in the pew, don't deny yourself the Eucharist. Just say an act of contrition. It's just venial these days, as long as you're resisting it. And then go receive the Eucharist. That's what they will tell you. You would not believe the emails I get on this. It's a staggering thing. And so when morality is up for grabs like that, usually at the hands of that generation of priests, the ones who were ordained in the aftermath of Vatican II or during the years of Vatican II, you see it as a pattern. And so it's not that surprising that those same priests who give that terrible advice and then who will at the ambo give very political homilies instead of just telling you basic things about the gospel and maybe once in a while daring to give you a 4 last things homily, it's not surprising that they would play fast and loose with morality to the point where they're just throwing the whole thing out the window to make themselves feel better about probably themselves based on other statistics. Now, that Baptist minister wasn't the only one who shared that data. J.D. Flynn of the Pillar shared it as well. He said 33% of surveyed U.S. Catholic priests, they said they definitely or probably would celebrate such marriages if the church allowed them. 33%. It's from deeper in. Now, he goes on to give more details. He says this includes 19% of priests under 55. So again, that's 1 in 5 of your younger priests that tend to be more conservative. 1 in 5. That's not good. And he is someone who understands data, says, I'm not sure what to make of this. It's like asking, would you pray to the Holy Quadrangle if the church declared Mary a member of the Trinity? For some, I suppose there is an openness to a moral change, while others might figure they just accept the church's authority. There is no real option among the choices for if the church fundamentally changed her declared doctrine, would you apostatize? I wonder how that might change the data. Also, I wish they'd surveyed the bishops. End quote. I'll point out something else here. If you ever see anything like that come down the turnpike, metaphorically speaking, massive changes to morality, formally done from the ambo, you're going to see people publicly declaring themselves to have become sedevacantists. Or they'll leave Catholicism for Eastern Orthodoxy, which is a weird thing to do, given that a lot of our moral chaos in the church now comes from the influence of Eastern Orthodoxy. It does. Go look up the work of Cardinal Walter Casper on that if you don't believe me, and where he got his worst ideas from. But that would be the effect. That would be the legitimate, real effect. And a lot of people have a hard time accepting that. But it's widespread, even among the under 55 priests. Now, the under 55 priests have in many cases been priests for 20 years. So we'll see what that's like. They didn't survey seminarians. And there's a lot of reasons for that, including seminarians often don't feel like they can freely admit how very Catholic they actually are. We hear reports of seminarians being told not to pray the traditional breviary, for example, not to have too close a devotion to the rosary, all those things. They tend to actually try to weed out the very conservative priests, the ones who are too rigid and clericalist. That's why you probably aren't going to see a seminarian survey, besides the fact that they tend to be pretty closely guarded as well. Seminarians tend to be at least somewhat separated from the world, and you're probably not going to be able to get their cell phone numbers very easily for research purposes. I'm curious, does this data surprise you in the slightest? Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Is this kind of, in modern parlance, is it a little blackpilling to see this? Or are you not surprised at all that the older generation of priests, the ones who are retired now, because a 75-year-old priest is at least semi-retired, you're not that surprised at all to see that? Let me know in the comments what you think about this. And hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church and for any priest who believes that who would happily celebrate such a parody of holy matrimony if the church allowed them to. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.